Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Shawn from Yukio Bonsai. This week's video is going to be a little bit different. It's going to really just entail a little bit of our immersive classes. So we have 4 immersive classes throughout the year. Starts off with the development, goes into design, into conifers, and then into deciduous for the 4 classes for the year. So we've already done the first 2. So I wanted to showcase a little bit of what goes on in those immersive classes.
And your first instinct should be movement is all. You should always be attracted to movement. By dropping those branches, you know what else you're doing? Is this. All of those things we're talking about it. Good movement, good taper.
So they're a full day class, and some of you may have either done these classes or maybe even heard me talk about these classes. They're really, really good for, I guess, the intermediate to advanced sort of level of hobbyist practitioner. We do a lot of demos and examples throughout the day, but it's really just about in-depth like knowledge and understanding of those 4 topics. In this week's video, we're going to be looking at our most recent class, the design class. Now you're going to see and hear Jeff and Anu talk a little bit about design aspects and fundamentals and things like that. Obviously, we're just going to try and highlight a couple of sections throughout the class. We're not going to be able to show you the full class, but I think it'll be a really good way of letting the viewers and anybody that may be thinking about coming to do these classes here at Chojo just to see exactly what it's like and what goes on and just the benefits that you can get out of it. It's winter here in the southern hemisphere, so hopefully all of your trees are settling into their dormancy right now. If you're in the northern hemisphere, they're staying cool and hydrated. Hopefully everyone around the world is keeping on top of their trees and designing, creating new wonderful trees, just really pushing themselves to the next level. And I think these classes, at least here in Melbourne, for anybody that's interested, I think these classes would really help elevate your skills and understanding and knowledge. So if you are interested, we do have a few spots left for our conifer class. I'll put the exact dates down below and a link to the website to book if you are interested. Our last one for the year is going to be deciduous, and a little bit about those classes. We go in depth, different species, yamadori, care, how to prune, how to wire, the right timings for everything. So it's very in depth on those exact categories and topics. Really looking forward to them. The development and design, they were fully booked. So if you are interested and keen on getting into one of these classes, then I would probably try and book in pretty soon because they do fill up quite quickly. Like I said, the next one is conifer class, and then the next one is deciduous, and I'll put the date for that one here too, just so you guys are aware of the timings for those classes. Otherwise, we still have our intro classes available here at Chojo Feature Trees. They run pretty much every 5 weeks or so. We also do a lot of private lessons as well. If you have a particular tree or a particular topic that you want further understanding on or help with, whether it's hands-on or just knowledge-based, we can certainly help you out.
So that's a really good. All of those points that we started just before lunch and are finishing now, those are things that you really want to focus on your design. And remember, we haven't even talked about styles yet. This is what I meant at the start of the class. These are the things that are going to make your tree good or not good. It's not the style. You can choose any style you want. And if you don't focus on these elements of your design, it's not going to have the effect that you want. So the balance and the asymmetry are foundational principles in bonsai design, setting it apart from the symmetrical ideals often seen in Western art, which is true, right? Like we think about your European gardens, you think about your Roman gardens or your French gardens. What are they? You walk into the path and everything is set perfectly on either side of the path, exact same thing, and working your way through. Again, it's not a right and wrong thing, but Japanese design is exactly the opposite of that. So nothing would be lined up perfectly, and bonsais are the same that way.
Do we give an example of balance?
Go ahead.
When you got something, say, like some of those styles that are like the literati or the very delicate trunks, balancing the amount of foliage in relation to the trunk is always going to be so important. So this is just actually had a major branch removed that filled in this area, and it was just feeling so full, which looked great. The canopy, if you removed the canopy and put it onto a very powerful trunk, would have been really great. Would have obviously kept it, but I had to feel like I had to create more negative space, tighten the tree up, make a little bit more asymmetry to tell that story of this sort of harsher landscape where it's like we've got a lot of movement and a lot of skinniness. That's telling you that there's a lack of nutrients, and it's living a very hard life. That's that style in your book. It's called literati, and they say that's one of the hardest styles to achieve convincingly. And I don't think this is a good example of literati at all, but it's in that category simply because it's very delicate. Most of the foliage is in the top third, and I need to keep on top of that, making sure that the visual balance in relation from foliage to trunk is balanced compared to, say, see that big fat guy over there, the big sumo, like that. I need like some visual heaviness in that foliage to balance with that heaviness of the trunk, right? So that's really important to keep that. Versus something like this where I need to make sure I keep coming back to a feeling of sparseness, a feeling of struggle, because that's what I'm telling the story with the trunk.
Or even something like this, if you imagine this much foliage on a tree like that, it throws the trunk out of proportion, it throws the whole movement out of proportion, it just doesn't work the same as something with less foliage on it.
And arguably that's still a bit full, that's still a bit heavy for that size trunk, and that could be worked right back and have a better play of, seeing a bit more negative space in that. That tree does need a bit of work. Like this, I think this is another, seeing as Jeff's not back, this is another example of literati, and so this was created with very brittle straight whips, dead straight whips found, and I was thinking of creating a setting together that was a twin trunk and had some nice movement, but I didn't realize how brittle they were because they'd been 14 years grown in the same tiny pot, so they were much older than they actually looked, so very hard to bend. So you can see if you follow this tree, there's only, between each node, there's only like a very slight bend to it, versus, say, if you look at the movement in this tree, in this top up, very tight. It makes the year of growth look much tighter, much smaller. The effect of creating literati like that is going to always tell the story much better than, look, there's no internode, there's no movement. Even though that's on an angle, there's no actual movement to tell you that isn't just 1 year's worth of growth, which it is. You can see the tree was very happy to there, very happy to there, very happy to there, and then he started slowing down a bit. So
that's a great example. Like what he was discussing, and back to species. So we're talking a white pine, and then some age and a little bit of stress through the tree through some seasons. But more importantly, the species. So I just finished telling you about that exercise of wiring whips, that you could do things really radically. If you try to take a white pine and do the same thing that you're going to do to a standard black pine, totally different. And if you're going to take a Yatsubutsu black pine, which is still a black pine, and I've always been blown away. They're so brittle, whereas the Thunbergii normal black pine is so malleable, you can just play with it in any way. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing I think you haven't even really touched on, sure, it's bunjin, as they call it in Japan, or a literati style, and a twin trunk, which is quite a... So let's focus on a few things, but before I even say that, it's very much a penjing style design. So I'm sure we've touched on that in the introduction class. So it has more of a Chinese styling to it, and a lot of that has to do with so much open space. Secondly, having the two trees kind of creates a little bit of a landscape as well. Usually that helps with almost a group setting kind of thing. So those are two things to think about. And also the vast, almost exaggerated amount of negative space. It's all negative space, right? So that Japanese styling, typically we want to cram a lot into a small area, and some of these more open ideas. So I just gave you ways to describe all of those things and their origins. But I encourage you guys to not let that say, I'm going to create penjing. I would just let this is a really big fundamental discussion. Do you allow the stock you're working on influence your decisions, or do you allow your decisions to force the stock into the position that it's in? And he just gave you the history of getting this tree, and so he kind of allowed what the medium kind of make the decisions for him, right? That's an important thing in design. So where are you going to come from? where you and to be fair, I've had quite a few experiences working with Japanese artists. And again, back to their tradition, back to they kind of want to force trees into their mindset, right? And then I've got to work with Peter Adams. He's an English bonsai artist. And he really stopped me, saying, like, just let the tree do a little talking. Let the tree do a little breathing. Let the tree influence you more than you influence the tree. And of course, the results are going to be better, easier. You know, really making sure. And I say that with both its shape, but the species of the tree. Junipers, for example, just smashing those back with hardly any foliage left on them at all just slows down that tree so much. It depends on that foliage to create vigor. Like Ani was talking about with the maples, more leaves, more internodes, more everything, the better the tree's going to respond to everything. So if you just say, oh, I got a vision in my head and I'm going to push the tree into that vision with no regard to where it's going, then you might actually be counter, the effect might be, you know, you may never get to where you want to get to, and B, you're certainly going to get there much slower. So those are things to consider as well, right, along the way.
And was just going to finish by just saying to maintain these trees, and I need to make sure the pads don't get too big. I need to make sure the branches don't get too thick. They need to feel delicate. They need to feel like that feeling of sparse, and what the literati incites or evokes in people is that it's a very, very harsh landscape it's growing in, not necessarily by the elements, but by the lack of nutrients or the by the.
And I mean, those are good examples. If I can give my view is when we talk about literati, I think this elegant movement suits the style way more. So once you start kicking really hard lines into this, to me, it doesn't have that same effect. So if you're working with trees where you want to have all of this space before the first bit of foliage, I think the movement and the flow has to be soft and feminine, you know, working its way up to the top where the foliage wants to sit.
I think most people would see this as being a fault in the tree, is that we have these beautiful kinky turns, and this is great movement through this top half of the tree, but we have this very almost softer curve and very dramatic, and that
it breaks continuity.
Yeah, it doesn't
it?
Yeah, it does. And I got it for that exact reason, because I thought that's weird, that's funky. I like to collect weird trees, and sometimes
and your first instinct should be movement is all. You should always be attracted to movement, right? When you're looking at stock, you go, "Oh my God, it's got some movement, really cool movement." Doesn't mean it's always great. I almost assure you, if a Japanese master was looking at this, you know what he would say? Air layer, bam. And they work a tree off of this. Because let's look at some faults. This section right here, we're lacking any taper. And we got this really cool little bit of elegant movement. And then we got this kick that comes out this way. We got this section, there's no movement in there whatsoever. And then the movement gets very radical, very radical. So remember what I was talking about before about continuity of movement. Yeah, you can't just call it good movement. Just movement isn't necessarily good movement. You want it to flow. I'd even say, although if I turn this like this, let's look at the line. Yes, 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 yes. Correcting itself in the right position at the right time. Where this is not. That's not the right correction. And this is not the right correction, although it is movement. So something to consider. I think those are two great trees. Similar styles, as Anya said. That's you know, one thing we should point out. I haven't said we're gonna talk deeply about styles in a minute, but so often, and some great trees take two styles and hybrid them together. So again, this is it's not like, okay, this is the only way to do an informal upright. There's so many different ways to do it, and sometimes you'll even add a cascading section of the tree in an informal upright. Debatable, and I've never thought of this. This is a great branch here. But if we really wanted to call this a Bunjin style tree, remove that branch entirely and try to find a different angle so this works better, and then we'll work.
It's a very
create the rest of the tree off of the foliage from here up.
Good argument for that.
Yeah?
There's a good argument for that, I think so.
Yeah, because I don't think, there's sections of this trunk line I don't particularly care for. I actually really think it's a great branch, which always is heartbreaking when he develops an amazing branch and we go, we should cut that off. You know what I mean? It'd probably take 5 years to get that branch right, but that happens a lot. But if we were to remove this whole section and find a new angle for this tree, I think you have a lot more of an option to try.
Drop something else down.
Drop all of these branches lower.
Much more delicate, and is in line with that feeling of
and what
fastness. I don't really have the word for that,
but by dropping those branches, you know what else you're doing? Is this. Right? So we lower those branches, then the spaces between each branches get more wide. We get a little bit more air moving through that. We get a little more light, vision, and depth. So making a transition from this, I'm not even sure Anu was necessarily thinking literary. He's probably just taking the branches that were there in the movement and turning it into something.
I'm just trying to create balance.
Yeah.
I don't care about the styles, honestly.
Yeah.
I just want to create what feels right, what feels good, what's balanced. Like, I'm working on my client over here, recreated this from what was actually a great tree.
This is a great example of a hybrid. This is
like what style is that? Do you reckon? Planting, I guess, maybe semi-cascade doesn't go below the brim of the pot though. But like this was a very zigzaggy tree, and I don't like those sort of bits of movement where it just looks so repeated, and there wasn't much taper in it. So I thought maybe recreating it from its first branch, or its second branch actually. That was its first one. And
so you're saying the tree grew off here.
Yeah.
So he grew off here, and he lopped all that off. And
this was just a shoot. So only this piece here is what was existing on the tree at the time, and it was just a little shoot, and everything's reshot and regrown in that nine-ish years. I think.
But
I think that's
stay on point. Really, kind of probably would fall into category of an informal upright, sort of moving its way up to an apex.
Yeah,
but he's kicked it over entirely to one side. Maybe it would fall between semi-cascade, but as he said, it doesn't really fit that category based on its way it's potted and the way it's presenting. And then maybe it's a little bit of a windswept because it really is all one-sided, right? So maybe the elements are defining this, where it's all getting pushed in this direction.
This is one style I don't like. I don't like windswept, which is why I've kept this little branch here to really visually balance.
And you know what else counters the windswept is this correction of a turn coming back into the wind, which never happened, right?
Back.
You know, so if you are doing the windswept, kind of have to be consistent. It's going that way. There's no all of a sudden something's going to go that way. It just wouldn't happen that way, right? But all that being said, it's a lovely tree, right? Why? Because it's got all of those things we're talking about. Good movement, good taper, it's got good dimension. It's got good, really. So
backbiting, we can push the tree back if we had to. We can recreate. It's not
got
limited.
A great harmony in its composition with a really interesting pot that helps. Really, you know what this pot does? It makes that trunk look powerful, right? Really, it's just blasting out of the ground, right? So you see what I'm saying? There's a great example of going, I really like that tree.
It's one of my favorites.
And it doesn't fall into any real style. So the characteristics that we're talking about that are going to help the balance of the tree very much outweigh the definition of a style, okay?
Yeah,
so
I'm just growing awesome trees, and I'm not trying to fit everything into
a
category that looks like everything in the book. Some things are just for fun, some things are experiments, and some things I'm really trying to do the best idealistic Japanese approach I can.
This part of bonsai is all about visualizing things, and some people do that better than others, like can see where it's going, literally see in your mind the tree before it's there, right? So that's something to work towards. I think a lot of art is the same, right? You can hear the song before you've written it, or you can see the painting before you've actually painted it. There is an element of when you work on trees that they do expose their design. So it's sort of like, don't get caught in not working on the tree. Usually it's all a process of elimination. Remove the branches that you know you're not going to use. And then maybe something will start, there'll be this eureka moment and go, I can see it. There it is, you know? So that's an element of the process that you kind of want to feel, and drawing could be a really good one to do it. So let's just rip through quickly these There's techniques to fix flaws, and they're just simple things. And these are things that you really, when you're designing your tree or making decisions, that you want to start thinking about. So if you're not getting the result that you want, let's look at, you got to reposition or remove some branches. That's definitely the case. And again, if in the introduction class, that's the whole process, right? We're starting with lots of branches, just slowly removing them or moving them into different positions to help design the tree. Root work during repotting. For sure, that can do so much to the design, including the angle that you put the tree within the pot, but also long-term helping the tree long-term through encouraging that horizontal growth of roots, which is benefiting the Navarre, which is benefiting the overall taper of the tree. Careful front selection and styling revisions over time, for sure. So like I say, sometimes you go, yeah, definitely that's the front. But now we're going into micro adjustments, like 2-degree turns, just for some reason or another to make them change. So that's another thing to tweak with your tree as time goes on. Pruning for structure and space. So that's kind of like positive and negative space. If you're feeling that part of your tree is really open and loose and there's way too many branches, you just got to balance it out through pruning and make sure that that balance is coming through the positive and negative space. Trunk bending or carving, that's pretty radical, but we do that for sure. And it's definitely in conifers pretty late in the game. You can get some heavy wire, some raffia, and even bending tools to go. Oh, I think like it's a window, right? So like some things are they're too thick to bend, but maybe even the latter end of the window, you're going, no, with enough torque and a few people and maybe a wedge, maybe a relief cut in the trunk, we're going to get that bend in it. And again, I encourage you to research some pretty heavy bending techniques. So that's a possibility, and definitely lots of times I can solve a big problem in inconsistency in the line.
Hopefully you guys enjoy the video. Hopefully you pick up on some things and maybe get excited and keen to further develop your understanding of your bonsai, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.